Executive Member for Housing, Partnerships and Planning and the Local Plan, and I'm going to be chairing the meeting. I've got to start with some normal housekeeping, although I'm not quite sure who I'm addressing these remarks to. There are not any fire drills planned this evening, so if the alarm sounds, please leave the building via the nearest exit and gather at muster point 2, which is located in the car park at the rear of the building. And please note that the meeting is currently being webcast live. Now, I don't think anyone is attending this meeting remotely, so we can begin with the apologies. Do we have any apologies? There's one I think I know, which is Mark Ashwell, who is unable to be here this evening and submitted his apologies. I don't think there are any others. Oh, Pauline. Yes, Pauline, who is the opposition member on the committee, is unfortunately not able to be here this evening. Thank you for reminding me of that. So if we move on to the minutes of the previous meeting, that's the meeting held on the 28th of November 2024. Is everybody happy that I sign those minutes as a true record? Yep, lovely. Thank you very much. Again, thank you. Are there any declarations of interest relating to any items on the agenda? No? Good. So we now move to the matters for us to consider this evening, and we start with the Local Housing Company's Managing Director update. And this, is, as the title suggests, is an update really on the matters that members of this committee should be aware of, and they're drawn to our attention in this report, which goes through a whole series of areas. I don't think we're going to need to discuss this at great length, but Karen, do you want to start us off by saying anything you feel you need to say in introduction to this?
Yeah, the paper presented is just updates of a generalist nature regarding the ongoing activity within the local housing companies, and highlights the papers that are going to be presented with a little bit more detail regarding the operations of those companies since the last reporting period.
Thank you, Karen. I don't know whether there are any questions in relation to this report. It is, as Karen's just said, reporting at a very high level on things. There aren't any great detail here. Has anybody got any questions? If they haven't, I think all we're required to do is really note this report. There's no approval as such required, but can I ask for you to note it? Thank you. Excellent. We've noted it duly. And if we can move on then to agenda item 14, which is Consolidated Local Housing Companies Budget Monitoring to January 2025. Would you like to, Kajal, are you going to speak to this report?
So today we're presenting to you a group consolidation version of January budget monitoring for 24-25. And again, for you to note the current position.
Yeah, thank you. It is important, I think, to say that a lot of work has been put in to try and effectively deal with some historic issues that have made life quite difficult for the housing companies over a long period of time. An enormous amount of work has been put in by Kajal and Karen and others to try and improve the situation, and they have done a splendid job, and I think we should thank them for that. Is there anything anybody wants to say about the current financial position? No? Okay, can we then note the recommendations on page 15 and agree to those? There are two recommendations: to note the current financial position as at the end of January for the 2024-25 financial year, and note the work on historical loans, impairments and outstanding repairs. Is everybody happy to do that? Thank you very much. Now we're going to move on to agenda item 15, and this is budget and rent setting. And again, I think it's probably appropriate to go to Kajal first of all for an introduction to this.
So this is our budget and rent setting assumptions for 2025-2026. We have based the assumptions on our current position, applying any inflation. Also for everyone to note the rent increase as well.
Thank you. And that rent increase is absolutely in line with the rent increase in the HRA, the Housing Revenue Account, which is our own council-owned stock. So we've adopted a completely complementary position, which I think is the right approach. Are there any questions anyone wants to raise about this?
I was going to ask the question about was it in line with the HRA, and as you've just answered that, I don't need to ask that question.
Right, it is exactly in line with the HRA. So we've got complete fairness and equity in terms of the way in which our tenants are treated in the HRA and Loddon and Berrybrook. Are there any other questions anyone wants to raise about any of this? Okay. We're moving on apace. Thank you. If we can move to item 16 on the agenda, that's development pipeline. Now, this paper is for information only, but it perhaps gives us the opportunity for a discussion of where we may go forward from here, and I think this would be potentially where we could have an interesting conversation. I think we might want to note the really good work that's been done to provide additional accommodation, specialist accommodation, particularly the HMOs, houses of multiple occupation, at Copsewood and at Little Horse Close in Early. Is there anything you want to say about this report before we open it up to questions, Karen?
Yeah, I have a slight update. So in the report, it talked about Kingfisher Drive as Loddon Home's third HMO acquisition within the financial year. At the point of writing the report, Homes England had announced that there was no headroom left in the 21-26 Affordable Homes programme, which caused Loddon Homes to think they would have to withdraw from that acquisition. Fortunately, through working in partnership with the council, we were able to proceed with the acquisition of that property, and we exchanged today. Completion is due on the 11th of April, so that will be a 6-bedroomed property for those young care leavers. In addition to that, approval was sought from the board and Holdco, exercising the urgent decision policy to proceed with that acquisition. Also, just to note, at the meeting of the Loddon Homes Board last week, approval was granted for pursuance of Clements Close and Alexander Garden, and that will go to Holdco either over urgent decision policy or at the meeting of Holdco on the 23rd of April. In regards to the pipeline that you questioned, work is being undertaken on a development strategy. Loddon Homes have agreed that whilst we are a complementary vehicle to Woking Borough Council's Housing Revenue Account, and we will work to deliver properties as per their requirement, it's essential that we have our own development pipeline as well. So a development strategy is underway, and that will be presented to the Loddon Homes Board in June, and then it will come to this committee here thereafter.
Great. Well, if I may just start the ball rolling with questions or comments relating to both what has been achieved and the pipeline. First of all, on what has been achieved, this is really helpful and positive from a council point of view, because our housing companies have made a big contribution in helping us with specialist accommodation, which is desperately needed. So I first of all want to say a big thank you on behalf of the Council for that, on behalf of executive colleagues. I also wanted to have a conversation about the pipeline and complementarity, which is a point you just raised, Karen. And it's really perhaps timely, given that this discussion's going on within Loddon Homes about pipeline and development strategy. Two things occurred to me recently that I don't think I've had a chance to share with you. But in the course of this consideration about how you think about the future and the role of the housing companies, I hope there may be some consideration given to two things. First, whether it would be possible for either of the housing companies to take on the function of becoming a management company. It might be useful if the council, via its housing companies, were able to intervene in what is a fairly contentious area of management companies set up by developers. It causes some real angst on the part of residents in leasehold properties in particular. But it is something where we could, through their housing companies, intervene in this market and set good standards, but also generate some money which could be used to subsidise other forms of affordable housing delivery, or forms of affordable housing delivery. And the second is a kind of related point about whether the scope for the housing companies, either of the housing companies, to take on the function of becoming a private renter of properties and using that private rental income to subsidise affordable housing delivery. One of the real challenges of the pipeline is, every time we think of things that the housing companies could do, we have to reflect on how that will impact on the HRA. Well, the HRA certainly cannot engage in acting as a private renter, whereas I would imagine the companies have that scope. So is it possible, well, any views you've got on that? Maybe it's an idea that's completely off the wall and wouldn't work, but any ideas you've got on that, or any reflections on how we might consider this in this review of strategy that's taking place?
Coincidentally enough, at the meeting of Berrybrook Homes Board last week, we took a paper to them asking for their permission for us to pursue the PRS sector for that company, because at the moment, the way Loddon Homes is set up as a for-profit registered provider, it can only hold 5% of its stock as private rented stock, 5% of turnover as private rented stock. So Berrybrook Homes would be a better place vehicle for the delivery of that type of housing. We have already instructed the commissioning team to go away and have a look at demand for private rented housing within the borough. They have already gathered that data, and it was presented to us back at our strategic away day towards the tail end of last year. So certainly from that perspective, that is something that we are willing to pursue and have a look and see if we can make it work financially for the companies. In terms of the managing agent side of your query, I guess that is a matter that would need to be taken back to the board for them to consider, because it would deviate away from the sole purpose of the local housing companies. But that is something I'm certainly happy to take away and get a view on that.
I realise it would necessitate kind of investment in expertise that may not exist already, because it's a new challenge setting up a management company, but it's worth reflecting on and thinking about. So thank you very much. The further questions, Prue?
Just a point on the private rented sector. The attraction for me is the number of people who really struggle with having to move regularly because the landlord's putting the rent up, the rents are extortionate. and they don't always do the repairs. We've got some good landlords, but also some awful ones. If the council, through its housing companies, was involved in this, we could be a reputable landlord that did do its repairs, that looked after the tenants, gave them possibly longer tenancies than they will currently get, and not increase them every 5 minutes. So I think, as well as it being a way that we could raise some income, and I'd be interested in the financial things when you have them, it strikes me as a good benefit for our residents, of whom there are a lot struggling at the moment with the cost of living and the cost of rented housing. So I think it would be a good way forward if we could do it.
Yeah, in a sense, that would be very much in line with what I was thinking about with this management company idea, that it would be an intervention in the market that would improve standards of behaviour, but also therefore benefit our residents, but at the same time has the capacity to generate some income, which the companies clearly need. Any other observations or questions in relation to this report? Well, our recommendation is to note this, because it's essentially for information only, and to thank Karen Kajal for taking forward some of the suggestions made. Shall we move on then to item 17 on our agenda? And this is a key performance indicator and compliance data. Do you want to start us off, Karen?
Yeah, so the data and the exception report presented relates to reporting period October and November 2024. The main area of underperformance relates to repairs, and that's not necessarily a reflection of poor performance, just a lack of data being available during this financial year. And the fire recommendations made as a result of fire risk assessments that had taken place during the course of the year. As I have said in the exception report, the committee should be reassured that none of the risks raised relate to high risk to property or life, and mitigating measures are in place to manage those recommendations whilst we resolve them.
Thank you, Karen. So just to absolutely clarify this, on the red items, performance information is a lack of data, essentially.
Yeah. Yes, in the case of repairs, because we had no data to refute that, we record it as underperforming. Yeah.
I suspect it may go beyond just lack of data, because there is obviously a tension at the moment with a shift from one contractor to another for the council's own housing revenue account properties, and that's shared, that contractor is shared with the housing companies. So we're trying to manage that process of transition as best we can, but inevitably there are a few glitches, and that possibly is reflected in this red KPI on repairs and maintenance. And on rent arrears and management, is there anything more you can say on that?
The rent arrears relates more to the pre-housing benefit payment performance. So once housing benefit is paid, the actual rent collection comes within target expectations.
Right, okay. So in some cases, these reds are not really bright red.
No, so we are reviewing the mechanisms for reporting on our KPIs for the next financial year, and recommendations have gone to the board and have been approved. We're going to work with Wokingham Borough Council's housing service to bring certain areas in line with how they are reporting them. So hopefully going forward it will be a more accurate reflection of performance.
That's great, thank you. Are there any other questions anyone wants to ask, particularly on the KPIs? No? Well, that's excellent, thank you. I don't think, I mean, I note that KPIs for Berrybrook are remarkably similar in terms of where the areas of concern are. So I don't think there's anything more I wanted to add, and if nobody else wants to say anything further, I think we just note the report and the appendices. So everybody happy to do that? Yes? Thank you very much. I think that closes our business for this evening. So thank you.